Here's a quick tutorial of the stitches you'll need for the Homestead pattern. First, you'll want to get your hoop out, separate the two. You might have to unscrew that top screw to loosen it up. Lay your first piece of fabric down and then your patterned piece. I like to use a second piece with white fabric just so you don't see the threads, the back threads through. Put your outer hoop, oops, I need to straighten it a little bit more. Put your outer hoop back on and go ahead and start screwing that tighter. You'll see that the fabric bunches up a little bit, and that's okay. As soon as you see those bunches of fabric, you can pull them out and just work your way around the hoop, getting a very taut piece of fabric. You definitely want that for embroidering your piece. Next, you'll need to separate your floss. Floss comes in 6 strands. This pattern calls for 3, so you'll want to go ahead and separate 3 strands out of the 6. This always feels a little awkward if you haven't done it before. When you do it more, it'll feel like second nature. And then you need to thread your needle. I like to make it straight, like cut the thread, and then I squeeze it between my fingers, and I take the needle, so I'm squeezing pretty tight, and then I take the needle and I make sure the eye is facing up, and then I push it over the threads. I'm still keeping my fingers clamped, and that seems to work. You can use a needle threader also. And then at the end of your thread, you need to tie a knot. That's so the thread doesn't come through your fabric with your first stitch. Just a simple overhand knot. I do a second one, and I make sure the knots are lined up. And then you're ready to stitch. The first stitch I'm showing you is the fishbone stitch. You'll want to come up through the top of the pattern, or the top of that tree, and then you'll want to go a quarter way down. And then you're going to come up on one of the sides. It doesn't matter which side, you just need to remember what order you're going in. And you're going to bring that stitch below the line stitch that you've made. And then you're going to go to the other side. And you're just going to keep following that rotation. It's really simple, but looks really impressive at the same time. It's one of my favorite stitches. And I'll speed it up because it does take a little while. And the next stitch is the stem stitch. I use that on the sun rays. This looks like a rope when it's complete. You come up through the fabric, and I go a couple stitch lengths away, and then you hold a piece back because you're going to come up in between. And then you're going to do that again. You want to go a couple stitch lengths when you go back into the fabric. And then when you come up in between. And it kind of gives it like a rope effect or a rope look. Very simple stitch again, and very impressive looking when it's finished. I'm not going to speed this one up. I feel like it's probably good for you to see this stitch done a few times. Something else with this stitch, if you'd like a tighter looking rope, you would just do that furthest stitch a little bit closer. And if you want a looser looking rope, you would do that further stitch a little bit farther away. So you can really control the way that it ends up looking. It's really just a matter of preference. The next stitch is the satin stitch. It's used often on patterns to fill in objects. You can see that you just need to come up on one side of your object, like I'm doing here, and then you'll come down to create, basically take up space with color or thread, which is what we're doing. And then I'll just keep following this roof line to fill in this whole roof. This pattern has a lot of satin stitching, so if you haven't done a lot of that, this will definitely give you that practice. This stitch is pretty simple, so I went ahead and fast forwarded, but let you see the end just so you get a good idea of what it looks like when it's complete. The roof looks a little unfinished, so I decided to do some back stitching. So you'll want to come up through the fabric, do a stitch length and go back down. And then you want to come back up a stitch length away from where you went down. And you're going to go backwards, back into that second stitch. And that's why it's called the back stitch. And then I'll just keep following that roof line and it will give it a more finished look. For this particular pattern and this object on the pattern, this back stitching will really frame in the satin stitching. You can watch as I go how it cleans up the bottom of that roof line. I'm going to show you how I finish off thread. You can see here that I'm going through my last stitch. I'll flip the hoop over to the back. And then I find the closest stitch and I run my needle through it. And then I run through that same stitch again. And then I create a knot. I put my needle through that loop before securing it. And then I usually do it a second time. And this is all preference. There's lots of different ways to finish off your thread. This is just the way that I prefer to do it. And then I go ahead and get scissors out and I snip off that little tail. How you back your piece is also personal preference. There's lots of different ways. I went ahead and cut around my hoop, getting rid of excess fabric. There's probably about 1.5 inches there. I like to use a piece of cardboard. I trace the inner hoop to get the pattern. There should be a piece in your kit though. And I lay it on top of the back. I start to tuck in that excess fabric. It's pretty simple to do. And once it's all secure and where I like it, you just simply press down and it will hold everything in place nicely. And you're finished. Thanks for watching this quick tutorial of the Homestead pattern. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and don't forget to hit subscribe.